Today I'm talking about options for those little finishing touches that will take your cards to the next level. I think a few of them might even surprise you. Let's start with some simple cards. I'm not going to be showing a lot of new techniques today because I want to focus on the embellishments. I'm just quickly inking up some snowflakes I cut from white cardstock with blue, red, and yellow ink. And then of course I had to make a rainbow with one by putting all three colors on. Let's start really easy. I've got a perfectly pretty simple card here. A red die-cut snowflake and a matching sentiment. And if that's what you've got time for, this will work perfectly as a Christmas card. But if you have an extra minute or two, you can add a little definition to the card simply with a black marker. This one's a Copic multiliner, and I can doodle a frame around the edge of the card. I like to start about a 1/4 inch in at a corner, and I find that the easiest way to get straightish lines is to move my whole arm. I turn the card so that the movement is the same each time, and I think that looks pretty good. But I wasn't quite straight in a couple of places, and that snowflake has a much heavier feel to it, so I think a heavier frame can work here. It's really easy to double up the thickness by drawing over it. I'm not even worried about lining it up the same. In fact, I'm adding little curves so that the frame looks hand-drawn and more substantial. You could do this with a ruler if you really want straight lines, and of course you can do this with any color you like. This is one of those cards where there's a lot of white space, so it's a great time to add some sequins to fill it in a bit. I like to use confetti sequins. They don't have holes in the center where the glue can ooze out. I have a standard configuration that I like to use on many of my cards, and that's one grouping of 3 and one grouping of 2 sequins. Because there's more white space above my sentiment, I'll put 3 different sizes above it, and I'll put 2 different sizes of sequin below. I like to form a triangle with that set of 3. And now, just for something a little different, I'm going to add gems to the larger confetti sequins. This is actually a great thing to do if your sequins have holes with glue squishing out. The gems can cover them, but even without the holes, it just adds something a little unexpected, which is always fun. I used 3 gems, leaving 1 sequin uncovered in each grouping, and that adds even more interest. Next, I have a card with a different kind of doodled frame. This time I forgot to turn my camera on, and I used a metallic gold marker to create dots all around. This one's a Corinne marker, but any metallic marker would do. This just shows that you can use different colors and different patterns to create a frame. Now I want an overall golden look for this yellow Christmas card, so I'm also going to add some metallic splatter with some gold watercolor. I have an aqua brush that I keep just for this purpose, and I just squeeze some water into the pan that I'm using, and I mix it up until the pigment is mixed in, and I've got almost a creamy texture to the paint. Then I just tap the brush over the card until I've got as much splatter as I want. Next, maybe you don't have matching gems or sequins, but that's okay. You can make your own. I've got a polka dot cover plate here, and I've cut a scrap of matte gold cardstock with it, which gives me lots of little dots that make the perfect stand-in for sequins. It doesn't have to be dots. Any small shape, like hearts or stars, would make perfect die-cut embellishments. This is a great way to get more from those small dies. Little stamps can also make great embellishments. I'm going to use these little dots to enhance some of the features of the snowflake by putting one on the tip of each finger and one in the center. And in the end, even though I managed to keep track of and glue down that yellow dot for the J, I just had to lift it up and replace it with one of the gold dots. Usually the replacement is necessary for me because I am forever losing the dot, but I do think it helps the sentiment to tie in with the snowflake. Now I didn't put the blue card together yet because I have another easy idea. I've got a circle die that's just about the same size as the snowflake, and I'm going to cut that from the white panel. And now we come to one of my favorite embellishments of all time, Stardust Stickles. This inexpensive glitter glue comes in all sorts of colors, but my favorite is Stardust. It adds the perfect subtle sparkle. I store it with the tip down so that it's always ready to go. And I like to put it on the edges of things like this circle, and I've got my own way of doing that so that it doesn't require any precision or even a steady hand. I just put a bead of stickles all around the edge without worrying if it's even or in the right place. And then I try to find a clean finger, and I just press it down from the outside edge, moving into the center. This gives a flat, sparkly edge with a fade out, if you know what I mean. It's really organic looking and pretty. And you can put it around the panel edges as well if you want, but today I'm just going to put it along the bottom edge. Again, it's a little asymmetrical and unexpected, and that always adds some interest. If you like the look of glitter but hate the mess, stickles really is a great way to go. The only drawback is that it does require drying time, so if you're in a rush, it's better to choose a different finishing touch. So far, my cards have been relatively flat and friendly for mailing, but here's a way to add some fun to this simple design. This is a mini action wobbler. It's a spring mechanism that gives movement to whatever it's under, and I want it under my blue snowflake. The snowflake center is open though, and the wobbler will be visible underneath. So I came up with a simple solution by cutting a circle to put behind the open center as part of the snowflake. I could have left it white and that would have been pretty invisible since most of the card is white, but I opted to ink it up with Cummerbund ink, which is a pale aqua that will match well and add some contrast to the snowflake. The action wobbler is self-adhesive. There's a clear piece that attaches to the snowflake and a white base that attaches to the card. I like to push it together or closed as I'm placing the snowflake so it's easier to get it in the right place. If I wasn't adding the action wobble, I probably would have popped up that circle for more interest, but even laid back into the hole, you can still see the sparkle, and with the wobbler, I really don't want any more bulk to my card. I added the die cut sentiment, and this one's done. For the multicolored card, I wanted to show you an easy way to add a customized frame to a card. I've got an extra panel here, and I'm going to use 3 Copic markers to create the frame. I used the chisel tip of my markers to try and get a thicker area of color, and I put them down in order around the edges. I like to go back with the top panel to check that the colors are solid and no white is showing. If you wanted to, you could mask off the edge of the top panel and do this right on that, but I find it neater this way. You could also cut out the center of this frame panel and use it for another project. If you don't have matching markers, you could use finger daubers and the inks. I've certainly done that one before too. I love the customized look you can get with this technique. You could coat the edges in stickles too if you wanted to make the frame glittery. Combining any of the ideas for finishing touches can really give you a unique look. I'm going to use a wobbler again on this card, but this time I'm going to put the die cut circle on top of the snowflake rather than behind. This gives me a place for my sentiment. I put the snowflake onto the card first and then added glue to the center and glued the white circle on top. And then finally added my sentiment. This one's cut from black cardstock, and as I did before, I'm going to substitute the dot on the J with a gem. This one's a gold gem. Then I thought it would be fun to add some more gems around the snowflake directly onto the white panel. So I pushed the snowflake down and I put dots of glue at each of the 6 points. Now those were some ideas for cards with a clean and simple design, but what if your background is busier? I said I wasn't going to focus on techniques, but I do want to just quickly show you this oldie but goodie for getting a look of a lot of depth with 1 layer of cardstock, some masking, and 3 colors of ink. I started by cutting a lot of snowflakes from full-back sticky notes. I find that a simple shape like this one from a Jillian Vance design works best. The more detailed your snowflake, the more likely it is that some of the little edges may lift and your masking won't be crisp. I placed 3 masks down on my cardstock, and then I blended my lightest color ink, which is Cummerbund, all over the panel. You do not have to worry about being a blending expert here. You just want coverage, and in fact, any variations in your blending will just give it more interest. Once the panel's covered, you really do have to let it dry so that the next layer of 3 snowflake masks will stick. I like to flip my panel over and press the masks down really hard, and I've seen people use brayers as well. We just want to make sure that those little fingers won't lift up. The next layer of ink is All That Jazz, which is a mid-tone teal. If you do find that your edges are lifting, you can press them down from the back, and you can also try to blend in the direction that will press the edges back down rather than lifting them. Okay, one more time. I let it dry and I added 3 more snowflakes. I pressed them down, and this time I'm using Uptown ink, which is quite a dark teal. You can see that my blending is pretty blotchy, and that's because I'm trying to be careful of the snowflakes, but I promise it'll look great. Now just before I take all the masks off, I'm going back in with Dress Blues, just around the very edges. This is going to add some more definition to the edges and more depth. Now for the magic moment of masking. Peeling off all the masks never gets old. The snowflakes are different colors because they had ink blended at different times, and this simple technique gives such a wonderful, blustery, snow blizzardy look. As each layer was drying, I made a couple of others in red and yellow. I've listed the ink colors in the supply list below in the description, in case you want to give it a try. So let's start with red again. I'm loving this busy pattern and I don't want to give up much of it, but a little definition might be nice. I trimmed the panel down to a 4-inch square so I'll have a nice white frame around it. Then I cut a gold frame with a smaller square of gold cardstock and this square die, which cuts a narrow frame each time it cuts. Adding splatter will also be very different on a busy pattern like this one. This time I'm using some white paint splatter from Avery Elle, and I'm just tapping it out of the tube all over. Whenever you're using white splatter, you really want your panel to be very dry, or it can start to take on the colors behind it, instead of remaining opaque. You may want that for a more subtle look, so it's good to know how your inks will react with the splatter so you can choose the look you want. Another way to create some definition is to take away the frame. For the red one, I put the gold die cut frame on top, and for this yellow one, I'm going to use that same square die to create a negative space. This is one of my favorite things to do. I find that the negative frame can be subtle if you glue the outside frame and the inner portion directly to the card as I'm doing here. But if you pop them both up, that negative frame also has negative dimension, if you know what I mean, and that is a really neat look. This time, instead of splatter, I'm using clear shimmer spray, also from Avery Elle. I love this stuff. The shimmer is so pretty and it helps to soften any harsh ink blending. If you want it without shimmer, a fine mist of water will also give some texture, depending on whether your inks are water reactive. Finally, for the blue card. This time I'm using shimmer paint as my white splatter. I poured a little on an acrylic block. You could do it on your work surface as well. And then I added a little water before flicking it off onto the panel. Actually, I think I'm more used to loading up my brush and then tapping it off. This method felt a little awkward to me, so I switched, but you'll figure out what works best for you. To finish this card, I did something else unexpected. I cut the panel with a large circle die instead of a square. This creates interest by introducing a different shape, and it also gives a different shape to that white frame around the panel. I added some of those little gold dots in the snowflake centers, and of course you could use gems or sequins or nouveau drops, anything you like. As I was making these cards and thinking of finishing touches to include, I went back to some of my older cards to find other examples for you to see. They'll be pretty quick, but you can pause and screenshot if you want to have a closer look. These little finishing touches are really what make our cards so unique and special. What's your favorite finishing touch? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time!